Hi everyone, Sarah from Sarah Homfray Embroidery. So I had a question in my first Q&A video, and if you haven't seen those, by the way, do check them out. I'll put some links in the description below this video to those, about different kinds of embroidery and what was what. So there seems to be quite a few people who are interested in this, so here is my guide to the different kinds and what each one is. So just before we get going, I just want to say that I'm trained in traditional English hand embroidery techniques, and those are the techniques that you'll find on my channel. So those are the topics that I'm going to cover today. There are lots more kind of embroidery techniques from all over the world, but we're just going to focus on those ones. So the first one I want to look at is what I'm going to call free-form embroidery, because it doesn't really fit into any of the other categories. It doesn't have a particular style or a historical background or anything like that, but it's just hand embroidery stitches on a ground fabric, so on a cotton or a linen backing. So something like this here, this is my Winter Wonderland project, and it's just lots of different kinds of embroidery stitches made to a design that I've made on a cotton ground. So anything like that we'll call free-form embroidery. So this is the one that probably confuses people the most, because it's very similar, but there's two different styles. So we're going to talk about Crewelwork first. So here's a piece of Crewelwork that everybody will know, I think, most famous piece in the world. So this is from the Bayeux tapestry, and what defines it as Crewelwork is the fact that it's worked in this wool on a linen background. So the wool is crewel wool, so it's a 2-ply wool as opposed to a 4-ply wool, which would be a tapestry wool. So crewel denotes the kind of wool that you use, so it's a woolen thread on a linen background, usually historically, and they'll be using lots of different kinds of stitches. Not so many when this was made, there are more now. So different kind of stitches in a wool on a linen background. So that's Crewelwork. So this is another type of Crewelwork that I have designed myself. So this was based on a ceiling design, a coffer from a ceiling pattern. So again, a woolen thread, woolen crewel wool on a linen background that I've hand painted. So my own design, so a fairly modern design, but taken from a more historic source. So that's also a crewel embroidery. And then this is also a crewel embroidery, but it's a different style. So this is what we would call a Jacobean Crewelwork embroidery. So again, it's the crewel wool on a linen ground, but this is a particular style. So this is the Jacobean area. So this is early 1600s, from James I time, and this is the style that they would have done then, which is large leaves and foliage and lots of animals and exotic creatures and things like that. If you want to know more about this technique, we do have a playlist up here all about this particular technique and other pieces from my collection as well, so do check that out if you want to learn more about Crewelwork and Jacobean Crewelwork. So I would say probably the most popular kind of embroidery in the world, dare I say it, is cross stitch. So cross stitch is literally what it says, stitches made in the form of a cross, usually worked on a counted fabric, such as an Ada fabric, which is 4 threads one way and 4 threads the other way, and it makes a little hole, and you use the hole to put your crosses in, and you count the pattern out from a design that's already been made for you. So this is a little cross stitch that I've done. So this is my little house sampler. I made this little house myself, and you can see the cross stitches, and you make up your design just with the cross stitches. Occasionally it might have an outline around it as well, but generally not more than those stitches, maybe a couple of French knots, but it really is all about the crosses. And this piece here, this is in a cloth tray. This is a vintage cloth tray that I bought. It's in my collection, and it's very, very, very tiny cross stitches, and you can see it's just red, just worked in one colour on an extremely fine linen, so they're very small, and just made the pattern across the piece, so not all filled in, it's just making a pattern out of it. So you can either do beautiful pictures with it, or you can just do patterns with it, but very popular form of embroidery, and one that's great if you're beginning embroidery. Okay, let's talk about Blackwork next. So Blackwork is the style of stitching, not necessarily the colour. So you might see this in other colours as well, but there's sort of 2 types of Blackwork I want to talk about. So let's look at this one first. So Blackwork is black stitches on usually a counted fabric, so a linen which is an even weave, so the same number of threads one way than the other, so you can count your patterns out. And there are standard patterns that you can use, and you would do an outline of your design and you would fill in with the patterns. Now these patterns are called diaper patterns. They're very traditional. There's lots of different ones that you can use to make up your designs, and you can use a different thickness of thread. So I've used a thicker one out to outline my piece and filled in with the stitches in between in a finer thread. So those are a couple that I've done there on some napkins that I made. And then you can do this style. So this is more about the tonal value of Blackwork. So it's really beautiful to make your dark and light shades depending on how many threads that you use. So you can use anything from a fine silk up to a sort of cotton embroider, and anything in between to get the different thicknesses. You can see here it's a bit thicker, here it's very fine, and I've actually left some of the stitching out to help have the same effect, to help fade the stitches out, and I'm using the stitches to actually shade with. So I'm still doing my patterns here. These are still counted on the fabric so that they're all the same, but I'm using my different threads and leaving some of the stitches out to create some really beautiful tones and do some shading with it. So two different ways you can do Blackwork. The shading one is more of a modern way, and filling in with the patterns is more traditional, but great to see a technique progress and do something different with it. So we're going to talk about needlepoint stroke canvas work. So there are lots of you out there who are probably more qualified in needlepoint to talk about it than I am. So my lovely friends across the pond. So very popular in America, needlepoint. So it's worked on a canvas fabric, so much thicker fabric with holes in it. So again, it's a counted technique, usually a basket weave or a tent stitch. I mean, you make your pattern up in that way, but often lots of other stitches come into it. In England and Britain, certainly, we would call this canvas work instead. So it's stitching worked on canvas. There is a little bit of a difference depending on what stitches you're using. So this here is my Queen Mary project that I did. I did this when I went to the Queen Mary 1, RMS Queen Mary, and I did some classes on there, and I designed this needlepoint and I've stitched this myself. So this is all in one stitch on a white canvas background, and this is all done in the tent stitch, which is one half cross stitch basically, and I filled it all in the same thing. Now this piece here, this is my elephant, my Salori elephant. I also did this project for a class in America, but they wanted to learn some more stitches and do something a bit different with it, so I would call this canvas work rather than needlepoint. So I've actually painted the background on this. You can see that behind the elephant. It's got some gold work on there, it's got some spangly sequins, and some traditional needlepoint as well. So I would say canvas work was maybe a bit more creative, but they definitely cross over, the words cross over, and you call needlepoint canvas work if you want, but anything stitched basically on a counted canvas fabric. Okay, so appliqué or appliqué, depending on where in the world you come from. So anything that is applied, so what the name suggests really. So you can cut out a fabric, either a printed one or one that you've painted yourself, and you apply it onto another surface and then you stitch on top of it. So you can do different things with the edges so that the edges don't show. So you can purposely fray the edges if you want to. You can put a cord around the edge and stitch over that to cover up the edge. You can turn the edges under. So there are different techniques within appliqué. So this teapot design here I did for a class up in Betty's Tea Rooms in Harrogate. And these are printed teapots on a piece of fabric. And we cut the teapots out, we applied them onto the background fabric, and then we did some other stitching over the top. So they've got some gold work on there, and some silk ribbon, which we'll talk about later. So embellished with lots of different things, but the teapots have been applied. So I also did the same with these butterflies, these 3 butterflies. This was a quilting cotton that I really liked that had the butterflies. Well, it didn't have the butterflies on it, it had the pattern on it, and I cut out butterfly shapes, and I applied those 3 shapes, and then I've just done some hand stitching on top just to embellish them. So you can do all sorts of things on top of it. It's just a way of adding another sort of background and another layer to your work, is just to apply these fabrics onto something first. Okay, so this one's quite an oddly named technique. You may have heard it, you may not. So Stumpwork is a 17th century, basically three-dimensional embroidery technique is all it means. It's not really known where the word comes from. There's lots of different ideas about it, but just think three-dimensional embroidery. So you can do a lot with 3 dimensions. So basically, if you can wrap it, stuff it, apply it, make a separate shape and put it on. You can do wires and wrap wires. You can get really, really creative with this technique. So we'll have a look at a couple here. So we'll have a look at this one first. So this is a little dragonfly. So you can see here that he's got 3-dimensional body. So I've actually stitched over that. I've just couched over it, but it sticks up quite highly. It's got some little beads on. And this is really a great thing you can do in Stumpwork. You can make these wired shapes. So this is some organza. I've got a piece of wire around it, stitched over the wire. I've cut it out. I've done all 4 wings and applied them, and you can see there how they stick out from the surface. A really wonderful technique to be able to use. You can do lots of insects and flying things with this technique, so really beautiful. And I just wanted to show you this one as well, because this is Stumpwork, but it's also Canvaswork. So we've already talked about Canvaswork, so stitching on a canvas ground, but this is Stumpwork as well. And I just wanted to show you this to show that you can mix your techniques together and you can do all sorts of things on the same one. So here's my Stumpwork leaf. So again, a wired shape cut out and attached to the ground. And these ones are actually, the idea was they were the same on the back, so you could look underneath it, and those have been attached. And the oranges are padded shapes. I've just a little squash, you can see it there. So I've made that bit separately. I've stitched it on a piece of fine canvas, and I've pulled it together around the back, and I've stuffed some wadding in it, and then I've attached it to the surface. So 3-dimensional shape, but in canvas. So it's Canvaswork and Stumpwork, and then I painted the background. So lots of really fun things that you can do with this technique to make your work 3-dimensional. Okay, so let's talk about Goldwork. So under Goldwork, I'm also going to say creative Goldwork and metal thread embroidery. They might be other terms that you hear when you're talking about this. So we've got loads of videos on this technique, really popular technique. Do check out the playlist up there for all the details on what the different threads and metals are, how to do the basic techniques, and then how to get creative with it as well. So lots to see up there. But this is a traditional piece of Goldwork. So if anybody said Goldwork, this is probably the first thing you would think about. So gold threads and metals, not necessarily pure gold before you get excited. Usually got a small content of gold in the threads and metals, and you apply them in quite a different way to any other kind of embroidery technique. This one's quite unique, and you apply them to the surface, you stitch over them, or you thread your needle through them in the case of the metals here, and you stitch them down and you make this beautiful design, and you're using your threads and your metals to create this incredible texture with the gold. So this is what we would call a traditional Goldwork. Again, Goldwork is the technique, I should say, and not necessarily the colour. So you can do it in silver and copper and all sorts of lovely colours, which we'll get to in a minute. So that would be traditional Goldwork. So this is what I would call creative Goldwork now. So we're using the same threads and metals, but in a more creative way, in a less traditional way. So you can have a bit of fun with it, basically, not worry about the rules, as it were. So I've got some ribbons in here. I've got some sequins that I've added in. This wire here is called a plait, and normally you would put it down like this, back and forth, and stitch it down. And I just curled it and fastened it down to make a sort of little tendril thing, which was quite fun. I put knots in my Japanese thread. I've made little balls out of the wire that's used for the pearls. So you can just have a bit of fun with it and play and do something a little bit more modern with these materials. I just wanted to show you this one as well. You might have seen the video on how I made this, how I designed it and how I stitched it, but I wanted to show you this one because it's a kind of a mix of the previous two. So it's traditional techniques. I've not done anything too crazy with this one, but it's done in colour. So just to show that gold doesn't have to be gold, we've got some blue in here, we've got some pink as well. I've put a little feather on it there, which is getting a bit creative, but these are the materials used quite traditionally, but in lots of different colours. So there's lots of places you can take this technique with all the different materials and threads that are available, and I just wanted to show an example of that. So lots of different names for this technique: silk shading, thread painting, needle painting, painting with the needle, all mean the same thing. So making beautiful realistic designs using usually a single thread in a very painterly kind of way to paint the image that you see. So this is a lily that I made. So I made this for a class that I taught again in the US actually. And you can see how it works really beautifully for flowers. You can get lots of colours in there, and because you're only using one thread, you can mix lots of colours together and you get a really subtle effect, so you can do some beautiful shading on it. It is a little bit more complex. It's a very simple stitch, but just to get your colours working well together can be quite difficult to do. So it does take a little bit more practice, this one, but it's well worth learning to do because it is really beautiful. Also works really well for animals and other subjects. So this is a falcon that I stitched. This is my Egyptian piece. You may have seen this come up in other videos. So it makes really, really great feathers. It's very small as well. You can do quite a lot of details with this to get lots of different effects with it and lots of textures. So you don't just have to do flowers with it. You can do fur, you can do scales, you can do all sorts of different things with it. So like I say, one worth getting the hang of, so you can do all these beautiful pieces with it. So now we're going to look at the massive subject that is whitework. So lots and lots of different kinds of whitework, depending on where you come from in the world as well. There are some very specific to different countries. I'm just going to look at a few of them. So we're going to start with Mount Mellick. So that's this here. So this comes purely from one town in Ireland where they did this work, and they used the motifs from plants that were in the hedgerows in this particular town. It's very specific to this one place, and this is what it looks like here. So it's white thread on a white background, as most white work is. Again, the technique rather than the colours, so you can get some colours come into it, but it does look very beautiful, just white on white. And I'll just move that around so hopefully you can see the different stitches. And you use different thicknesses of thread for this. Quite a thick thread to this, so it gets quite textural here, and you use the different thicknesses to create the different effects, working the plants that would have been in this particular town into quite a floral, quite a stylized design. So that's Mount Mellick. So this one is shadow work. So I'm just going to lean it a little bit so hopefully you don't get any reflections on it. So this is worked on an organza fabric, so something that's see-through, and you work, it's got a sort of pattern applied to it. So in this case, this is my dragon, and I've applied another organza to it, and then you work particular stitches around this, and you can see through it. So you work a herringbone stitch underneath. You can see it probably best in these parts here. You actually work that on the back, so that when you turn it over and look on the front, you can see a shadow of the stitches through the front. So it's about layers and about having to think about what's on the back and what will it look like on the front. So you have to be super careful about how you start and finish your threads on this one, but really beautiful, delicate technique, and that's shadow work. So I'm going to show you two techniques on one piece here. So this is drawn and pulled. So drawn thread work, you draw the threads out from the fabric and then you actually put some stitches back in. So that's what this looks like here. You can see that beautiful lacy pattern that it makes. So these warp threads will have been pulled out here, and these are the weft threads that you can see remaining, and then you work stitches back in to these threads to make these patterns. So these are woven variations, and there's some knotted stitches around there. Put some ribbon in it over here. So there's lots of different things you can do, and it looks beautiful and lacy, but obviously you've got this basically great big hole, so it's quite delicate until you put your stitches back in. So that's drawn thread work. This is pulled thread work. So now we're pulling the threads together of the fabric to make different patterns, and I hope you can see that. Here's my little fish. I'll just move him around a bit. Hopefully you can see him. And you can make these different patterns depending on how you pull the threads together. So different stitches worked at a slightly tighter tension, draw the threads in, and if you work them in a particular order, they will make a particular pattern. So this one's got, I think it's 5 different patterns in it, and you can see how beautiful and lacy this looks. So 2 techniques that go really beautiful together, and that's drawn and pulled work. So this is the technique of hardanger. So this comes specifically from Norway, and this is a counted technique. So you can see this background fabric here. It's got the holes in it and the even weave of fabric, and you actually cut away the fabric with this one. So it takes a certain amount of nerve to do this, and preferably practice on another bit first. And you actually cut away the square, and then you work these little blocks to stop the fabric from fraying even further. So these are what are called cluster blocks. And then where you get the holes, you can either leave them as the holes, so this one's got these cluster blocks all the way around the edge, or you can put patterns back in the holes. You can work some bars across it, buttonhole bars across it, and you can make different patterns. This one's got a little bit of picots in here, and so you can put patterns back in using various different stitches. Make very geometric designs, so you can plan them out first, so you know exactly what you're doing before you start cutting your fabric. So that's hardanger. So the last one I'm going to look at in this video is Broderie Anglais and Richelieu. So two techniques there. So Broderie Anglais you might know from clothing. You used to be able to buy summer dresses with these beautiful little cut circles in them, basically, with the holes in. So that's what these are here. So you make a hole in your fabric, usually with a special tool, and you do a stitch around the edge and you pull the hole open and it makes these beautiful patterns. So that's Broderie Anglais. And this is the Richelieu here, so the larger cut work shapes, and these are bars across it. So you would cut the fabric out first and you put your bar in, and then you can wrap around your bar. So these are wrapped bars, you just go round and round. These are buttonhole bars with picots, so just another way of putting a pattern in over a hole, so cutting out the fabric and putting something back in to make a pattern. So a really traditional technique now that you may have heard of is smocking, and I'm just going to show you my smocking sampler. This is the one I did on my apprenticeships. We did lots of different samples of the different types of smocking. So depending on where you are in the world, you might recognise some of these, you might not. So traditional smocking, I'll put this down and then show you a picture of that. So this is traditional smocking. So you gather all the fabric up. So you run lots of thread through, you gather the fabric up, and then you actually work stitches over the gathers. You can see that here, to make different patterns with the stitching. So it's sort of a two-process technique really. So you've got to get your gathers nice and even, and then you've got to get your stitches nice and even. And this was traditionally stitched on smocks that people wore. Usually would have done it in the same colour. It would have been a white on white technique, but it's nice to get lots of different colours in it now. So that's traditional smocking. And then there are lots of other different kinds of smocking. So I'm just going to look at this and I'll put pictures of them up here. So we've got North American lattice smocking. So this is where you put little dots together and you stitch the dots in a particular order and you pull the threads up and it makes this fantastic pattern. It's really quite magic when you see it happen, and you just follow the pattern and that's what you get. So this is a North American lattice smocking. We've also got on the same line, so seamless tucks and puffs. I'll put that one up here for you. So again, you have little dots on your fabric, you work a little cross to pull it up, and then you get these little puffs of fabric in it. So if you were doing something like dressmaking or something, you could get some really amazing textures with this sort of smocking technique. So much more of a modern technique than that traditional one. And then the last one I just want to show you is the Italian smocking. Now this one is really, really tight. You gather your fabric up, so it's really tight, it's all smushed up together, and then if you do the stitches in different order, or you skip one out, you can get these different effects and you can get these little bubbles and this texture in it. So you can do something really quite interesting with the Italian smocking. Does take a lot of fabric, so do some measuring before you start, because you will definitely need more than you think you do. And then I'm just going to show you this pineapple to finish with. So this is something I made using lots of different techniques, so you can see the puffs there in the actual pineapple, some traditional smocking in the leaves as well, and put them together just to see what I could do with the different techniques. Probably one of my favourite techniques actually. It's very hard to do this badly. This is silk ribbon embroidery. It's embroidering with silk ribbon, so it does what it says on the tin. So we do have a playlist with lots of different kinds of silk ribbon stitches. There are some specific to this technique, so do check that out up here with some projects to do as well, because it is a lot of fun to do this. And this is what it looks like. So here's some little silk ribbon dragonflies. You do really need to use silk ribbon for this. Because it's nice and soft. Any of the ribbon's just a bit too stiff and it won't manipulate in quite the right way. You can colour it yourself. I do have a video on how to do that. So this one has been coloured. This was white and I've coloured it in green. So if you don't have the colour you want, you can just colour it in, which is brilliant. And you can do really beautiful things with it, beautiful flowers especially, and lots of lovely designs with this. So do check out the silk ribbon videos. Okay, not a particularly English technique, this one, but it's one that you might come across and is really pretty as well. So this is Shisha embroidery. So Shisha is the Persian word for mirror, and it's basically how to stitch down mirrors. So you can see some of those here. And then you work a grid over the top, you work around the grid, and you fasten the mirror to the piece of embroidery. So you can add beautiful embellishments this way. It doesn't just have to be mirrors, you can add coins on as well. I've got a little coin over here. You can add cabochons on, which is like a bead without a hole in it. So just something worth knowing about if you want to add a bit of bling and a bit of sparkle and a bit of texture to your embroidery. Now I wanted to include bead embroidery just because I really love beads, but also another great way to add something to your work if you want some extra texture. So I want to show you my peacock here, this little one up here. So this is the one I did the mounting video on. If you want to know how to mount your videos, I'll put a picture up so you can see it a bit more detail. So it's just basically stitching with beads on a fabric. So it's not three-dimensional bead projects, it's not bead weaving or anything like that. It's actually stitching with the beads, and you can put other things with it as well. You can put goldwork in there and hand stitching in there. Just really beautiful way to add something extra, so I did want to include that in here. So let's talk about Tambour embroidery. So a very different kind of embroidery now. Lots of couture houses do this. It's used in lots of fashion. You will have seen this type of embroidery in a lot of places. Done with a hook, looks like a very, very small crochet hook, and you go through the fabric back and forth, and you pick up the thread and you kind of do this movement through it, and it looks like a chain stitch basically, but it's done with this hook. This is what it looks like here. This isn't my piece. I would like to add, this is Caroline's piece, Caroline Homfray's piece. So if you've seen our Tambour videos and want to know how to do Tambour embroidery, it's Caroline that teaches this because she can do it super beautifully. So this is her piece, and you can just see how intricate you can get with this, and once you get into the rhythm of the stitch, it can be a bit tricky to get the hang of, I will say that now, but once you get into the rhythm of it, you could do all sorts of really beautiful things with it. You can also do it on a see-through background like this one here. This is a little star that she made for me, and you can hang it up and make decorations and jewellery and put it on clothes and do lots of things with it. When you get very proficient at it, it's supposed to be very quick, so that's kind of the difference between that and just you doing normal hand embroidery. If you can't get the hang of it, you can just do a chain stitch, but you can see how beautiful that this technique looks when you do get the hang of the hook. So not a very common one, this. You may never have heard of this, but I did just want to mention it because it is beautiful. You may have heard of a Beetlewing dress. There was a famous dress as well that was a Lady Macbeth costume, Shakespeare play, made out of beetle wings, and it is actually real beetle wings, and you can cut them to shape and you can put them down like you would a bead, and they were often made into dresses on beautiful white organza, trying to think of the word, an organdy, that kind of fabric. So they got a sort of see-throughness, and they got these beautiful jewel-like wings on them. You can see it here in this piece, and how beautiful colours they are and how they shine. So you may come across that if you're interested in historical dress. So I did just want to mention that because they are quite stunning. So you may not have heard of this technique, but basically it's a particular kind of embroidery done in the medieval period. Extremely exquisite embroidery. Don't really do anything like it today. And it took a long time to learn how to do this. So it was used a lot in ecclesiastical work, and it was made for the robes and the dresses of kings and queens from the medieval period. So it's very particular, a high level of skill involved in this kind of embroidery. This is a little one that I made. So this is a sort of thing they would have done, and consisted of very few different techniques really. So a lot of split stitch in it. So all this is split stitch shading. So very simple stitch where you just come up and split the thread, the stitch that you did before, and if you put it together in a different order and you make patterns with it, the thread, and they would have used silk at the time, reflects, and that's what gives you the texture and the shapes and the contours of the face and the hair. And then another technique they did was what's called underside couching. So we do have videos on underside couching if you want to have a go at that too, where basically you use a gold thread, but you stitch it from underneath and you just pull it through to the back, so you don't see any of the thread holding it down and you just see the gold. So this was all about showing your wealth and your power, and how much you could afford, basically, because they would have also been embellished with pearls and gemstones as well. So they were very expensive pieces, done to a very high technical level, really, really fascinating technique. If you're interested in it, do check that out. So that is Opus Anglicanum. So we're going to finish with this one because it's always quite impressive, and sometimes I try and explain it to people and I see them looking completely baffled because they don't understand. So both sides alike, it is the same on the back as it is on the front. It's one piece of stitching around one piece of fabric. It's not two pieces, a front and a back stuck together. It's one piece, and this is what it looks like. So that is the front. Ignore the letters because this is a different technique other than the outline, but the crown and the spray here, the flower spray. So that's the front, and that's the back. So one piece of thread going around the fabric. So you've got to make sure you're super neat on the back. For all of you worrying about what the back looks like, this is what the back needs to look like in this technique. I'll actually put this down and put a photograph up so you can see that more closely. So this is the front, and then we'll turn it round, and this is the back of the same part. So that's why it's called both sides alike. And you might see some really stunning examples done often in Chinese and Japanese embroidery, done in very fine silks, and they spin them on a frame, and it's the front and the back of the same thing as well. This is more of a traditional English one version that you would see on standards, military standards in churches and the like, but the technique is the same. So one set of stitching on one fabric and super neat on the back so that you can turn it around and see both sides. So I hope that's helped clarify what some of the different kinds of embroidery techniques are. We've got loads of videos on most of these techniques, in fact, so do head to the channel and check those out. And I also have a different channel, Sarah Homfray Creates here, for all about how to design your own embroideries and how to make your own pieces. So do go and have a look at that as well, and I'll see you next time.